My parents sold my car to fund my sister's luxury trip, so I moved out silently. And what I did next left them shocked forever. I'm a 22-year-old guy who's always been the dependable one in my family, the kind of son who stayed quiet, followed rules, and cleaned up emotional messes no one else wanted to see. While my younger sister floated through life like a celebrated miracle, I worked part-time through college, stacking shifts at a grocery store and tutoring on weekends just to save enough for my own car. I didn't want to ask for help, didn't want to owe anyone, especially not parents who treated responsibility like it was invisible. When I finally bought that car, a plain silver sedan with a faint scent of old leather and gasoline, I felt something close to pride for the first time in years. I remember running my hand along the steering wheel and whispering, "This is mine," like a secret I wasn't used to keeping. My dad barely looked up from the TV and muttered, "Good, now you can drive your sister wherever she needs," like that was the natural order of things. My mom smiled absently and said, "At least someone in this house knows how to behave," and I wasn't sure if it was praise or a quiet dismissal. My sister laughed, twirling her hair, saying, "Relax, golden boy, you live for this responsible stuff," and they all chuckled like it was harmless. Inside, something tightened. I told myself I was just sensitive, that loyalty meant staying steady, that love meant compromise. But it started happening more often, little remarks about my car being just sitting there, or jokes about how much my sister deserved, real experiences. Each comment felt like a small scratch across my sense of ownership, like they were already rehearsing a decision that didn't include me. And every silence between us felt heavier than the air tonight. I'm a 22-year-old guy who's starting to realize that something about my parents' obsession with my sister's upcoming luxury trip feels disturbingly off. They talked about her beach photos and VIP brunches with a softness I'd never heard when discussing my tuition, my overtime, or my exhaustion. One night at dinner, my mom smiled and said, "Sometimes family has to support real opportunities, not just basic responsibilities." I felt the words land strangely, like they were aimed directly at me, even though my sister just scrolled through influencer pages beside her untouched plate. My dad leaned forward and casually asked, "You don't really need your car all the time, right?" I swallowed and replied, "I worked for it, so yeah, I kind of do," trying to keep my voice steady. My sister rolled her eyes and sighed, "God, you're so dramatic, it's not that serious." The room felt warmer, heavier, like the walls themselves were closing in around my quiet resistance. I watched their faces carefully, noticing a shared look that felt rehearsed, coordinated, almost anticipatory. A strange chill crawled up my spine as I realized they weren't asking, they were testing how much control I'd still surrender. I forced a weak laugh and said, "It's my car, not some extra couch you can just give away." No one laughed back, and the silence that followed felt like a warning I wasn't meant to hear yet. My mother finally broke it with a soft, suspicious smile and whispered, "You worry too much, we just want what's best for everyone." But the way their eyes avoided mine made my stomach twist, like I'd just stepped into something I couldn't pull my foot out of. And for the first time, I wondered what else they'd already decided without ever including me fully. I'm a 22-year-old guy who woke up that morning with a strange heaviness in my chest, the kind you feel before bad news even arrives. The driveway looked wrong, empty in a way that made my heart stutter, and it took a few seconds to realize why. My car was gone. Not parked crooked, not moved slightly, just gone, like it had never been mine to begin with. I stepped inside, my voice already shaking. "Where's my car?" I asked, trying to keep my composure while my palms burned with cold tension. My mom didn't even look surprised. She set her coffee down with calm precision and said, "We made a family decision." My dad sighed deeply, like I was the inconvenience, and added, "Your sister needed funds for her trip. It was more important than a vehicle sitting outside doing nothing." I remember my sister flipping her hair and smiling faintly, the glow of her phone reflecting in her eyes. "You'll get over it," she said lightly. "It's just a car, not your identity." Something cracked inside me. "I paid for that," I said, my voice rising despite the effort to stay civil. "I worked for every cent. You didn't even ask me." My mother tilted her head, disappointed, like I was disappointing her. Don't be selfish. You live under this roof, so you contribute to this family. We did what was necessary. The words hit harder than the actual loss. My stomach twisted, not from anger, but humiliation. They weren't even trying to pretend it was a mistake. They were proud. Proud that they'd taken something I built and handed it over as a gift to someone who never lifted a finger. You should support your sister, my dad continued. She has potential. Potential. The word echoed painfully. My hands trembled as I realized something brutal and simple: I was nothing more than a resource to them. A quiet investment to drain when convenient. And as my sister laughed softly behind me, already excitedly booking her next luxury activity, I stood frozen, staring at the empty space where my freedom had been, knowing this betrayal had only just begun. I'm a 22-year-old guy who realized in that moment that something vital inside me had quietly snapped, not in a dramatic explosion, but in a slow, silent fracture that hurt even worse. I didn't scream, didn't slam doors, didn't beg them to understand, because I already knew they never would. I just stood there, looking at their familiar faces and feeling like I was seeing strangers who wore my family's skin. The house felt colder, like the warmth I once tried so hard to maintain had quietly evaporated. You're overreacting, my mom said, waving her hand dismissively. A car isn't worth all this attitude. My dad rubbed his temples and sighed. You've always been too sensitive, this is why your sister is stronger than you. Stronger. The word scraped against something deep and raw. I nodded slowly, pretending compliance, because arguing felt pointless now. My sister smirked as she passed me, her suitcase already propped beside the door. Thanks for the upgrade, hero, she teased, and the sound of her voice hit me like a needle under the skin. I retreated to my room, closing the door behind me with carefully controlled quiet, as if even the sound of a latch snapping shut might trigger another lecture. I stared at the familiar cracks in the ceiling, at the posters I'd hung years ago, at the life I'd tried so hard to make stable under this roof. Every memory replayed with a sickening clarity: the nights I skipped dinners with friends to work overtime, the mornings I gave my sister rides without complaint, the way I swallowed frustration like it was loyalty. A strange numbness replaced the anger, creeping in like a fog, heavy and suffocating. I could hear laughter downstairs, the clinking of glasses, my parents praising her itinerary like she was a miracle they'd personally financed with grace rather than theft. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to fix the pain and simply let the silence speak to me instead, as a quiet thought settled somewhere deep and dangerous. Maybe staying wasn't loyalty at all, maybe it was surrender. I'm a 22-year-old guy who started seeing my own life like a quiet prison cell the moment that thought took root, the idea that maybe staying here wasn't loyalty but self-destruction. That night, while the house slept and the hallway lights glowed faintly under my door, I opened my laptop and searched for the smallest apartments I could afford on my salary. The silence wasn't sad anymore, it felt strategic, deliberate, almost empowering in a way that scared me. "You okay up there?" my mom called casually from downstairs, her voice coated in false sweetness. "Yeah. Just tired," I lied, staring at listings that felt like escape hatches instead of homes. I began calculating everything: my remaining savings, extra shifts I could pick up, how long it would take to build a safety net they couldn't touch. Every number felt like a tiny step toward reclaiming my voice. My heart ached, not because I missed them, but because I finally accepted they were never going to change. The next morning, I started moving through the house differently, quieter, more observant. I noticed how my dad glanced at my laptop with suspicion when I closed it too quickly. "Planning something?" he asked, half joking. "Just catching up on work stuff," I replied calmly, surprised by how natural the lie felt now. My sister brushed past me, humming excitedly about her trip itinerary, and there was no anger left, only distance, like we were strangers sharing a hallway. I began storing cash in places they'd never inspect, deleting browsing history, isolating pieces of my life they no longer deserved access to. Something inside me cracked open, not with pain, but clarity. I wasn't trying to repair anything anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I wasn't hoping for fairness. I was planning my disappearance. And as I packed a small bag under the cover of night, folding clothes with careful precision, I realized they had absolutely no idea that their most obedient son had already started walking away. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. I'm a 22-year-old guy who learned how to perform normality like a second skin, smiling and complying while my mind operated somewhere far colder and sharper than they ever imagined. At breakfast, I slid into my usual chair, the wornwood creaking beneath me, and listened to my parents talk about my sister's packing list as if they'd funded a Nobel Prize instead of stealing my freedom. The smell of burnt toast clung to the air, heavy and stale, and every laugh felt like it echoed off something hollow inside my chest. "You've been awfully quiet lately," my dad said, narrowing his eyes. "Don't tell me you're still hung up on that car thing." I forced a small shrug. It is what it is. No point fighting reality, right? My mom smiled approvingly. "See? That's maturity. You should learn from him," she said to my sister, who barely looked up from her phone. Inside, I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching a badly written play about my own life. I nodded, washed dishes, folded laundry, went through the motions of the obedient son they'd carved me into, all while memorizing their routines, when they left, when they slept, when the house fell completely quiet. Every second felt like preparation for something they couldn't sense creeping closer. Later that evening, my sister breezed past me in a cloud of expensive perfume and said, "You should smile more. You look like someone died." I almost laughed. Someone had. The version of me who believed in them. In my room, the fan hummed softly, stirring warm air across my face as I scrolled through my bank app, confirming balances, transfer limits, and final deadlines. Each digit felt like a heartbeat marking the countdown to freedom. I placed my phone down and stared at the ceiling, feeling a chilling calm where pain used to live. They thought they had broken me into compliance. They thought my silence meant surrender. But the truth was far more dangerous than anger. I wasn't healing. I was detaching. And with every passing hour, their control over me slipped further into something they'd never be able to retrieve again. I'm a 22-year-old guy who thought I'd already hit the lowest point when they sold my car, but I was wrong, because that came the night I realized just how little of a human being I was to them. I stood halfway down the hallway, the dim yellow light flickering overhead, when I heard my parents' voices drifting from the living room like knives moving through air. "If things get tight again, we can always sell some of his stuff," my dad chuckled, like he was pitching a clever business plan. My mom laughed softly. "He won't even fight it. He never does. He's the reliable one." The word reliable didn't feel like praise anymore. It felt like a label you slap onto property. My sister chimed in between sips of her sparkling drink. "Honestly, his room is full of junk anyway. He should be grateful we even let him stay here." Their laughter followed, careless and warm, while something hollowed out inside my rib cage. I pressed my back against the wall, my palms slick with sweat, my breath shallow and uneven. Every memory collided in my head at once, the late nights, the sacrifices, the way I shrank myself to make them comfortable. I wasn't their son. I was inventory. The realization slammed into me with brutal clarity: they didn't just betray me once. This was who they'd always been. And I'd never meant more than what I could provide. I slipped back to my room, every step feeling heavier than the last, like I was walking through thick water made of grief and shame. I sat on my bed, staring at the faint patch of moonlight on the floor, and for a moment, I wondered if leaving would even matter. Would they notice? Would they care? Or would they just calculate what else I left behind? My phone buzzed softly with a message from my sister: "Don't forget to clean the kitchen tomorrow. You owe us." Oh. Like love was a debt spreadsheet. Like existence itself came with a price tag only I could pay. I curled my hands into fists, nails biting into my palms, as the weight of it all settled into my bones. This wasn't just pain. This was erasure. I felt smaller than I ever had, stripped down to silence and obligation. And as I stared into the dark, something terrifying and quiet crept into my helplessness. A question that changed everything. What if I simply stopped existing to them? I'm a 22-year-old guy who decided that night that I wasn't going to disappear in theory anymore. I was going to do it in real time, quietly, carefully, without giving them the satisfaction of a scene. The house breathed around me in slow, familiar creaks as I started moving my most important things, one piece at a time, like I was dismantling a life no one respected. A hoodie here. A pair of shoes there. My old laptop slipped into my backpack while the hallway clock ticked loudly, each second feeling like borrowed air. I timed everything around their patterns. My dad's snoring started like clockwork at midnight. My mom's bedroom light always clicked off after her late show. My sister stayed glued to her phone until she finally passed out with it pressed to her cheek. When the silence deepened, I stepped out barefoot, the cold floor shocking under my skin, and carried another box to the trunk of my friend's car parked carefully 2 blocks away. "What are you doing up so late?" my mom suddenly murmured one night, her voice sleepy and suspicious. "Just couldn't sleep," I said softly, forcing a yawn. "Needed some air." She nodded absently, already half dreaming again, completely oblivious to the fact that her son was erasing himself right under her nose. Each trip bruised my chest with memory. The framed photo of us at my high school graduation, the little trophy I'd won for academic excellence, the notebook filled with plans I once believed included them, I left most of it behind. I only kept what felt like it belonged to me, not to a version of me they preferred. The room grew emptier each night, but my mind felt clearer, almost lighter, like I was shedding layers of borrowed obedience and swallowing the fear with determination. I started to imagine mornings not filled with criticism, dinners not poisoned with comparison, silences that didn't feel like punishment. Yet, every time I closed my door behind me, I felt the ache of knowing that when they finally noticed, there would be no warning, no explanation, no goodbye. Just absence. And with each secret trip into the dark, my heart beat faster, because the moment of discovery was getting closer, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what their realization would unleash. I'm a 22-year-old guy who knew the moment would come when silence would finally expose me, but I never expected the impact to hit so brutally or so fast. It happened on a quiet afternoon when my phone began vibrating non-stop across the small table in my empty apartment. His name flashed across the screen. Then hers. Then my sister's. Over and over. Like sirens I refused to answer. "Where the hell are you?" my dad barked when I finally picked up, his voice sharp and panicked in a way I'd never heard before. "You just left. You think you can disappear like this?" my mother snapped in the background, her tone swinging between anger and confusion. I stared at the cracked wall in front of me, my heart beating calmly for the first time in weeks. "I didn't disappear," I said softly. "I just stopped being where I wasn't wanted." There was stunned silence, followed by my sister's irritated voice cutting through. "You're being so dramatic. Come back and stop embarrassing us." Embarrassing. Not hurting. Not betrayed. Just inconvenient. Their words came in waves. Accusations. Guilt. Panic. "You owe us an explanation. We didn't raise you to be this ungrateful. You're destroying this family." The same script, different volume. I listened, but for the first time, it didn't choke me. It felt distant, like their voices belonged to a past version of my life that could no longer reach me. "You sold my car without asking," I reminded them. "You laughed about selling my stuff again. You made it clear where I stand." My mom's tone softened suddenly, almost rehearsed. "We were just stressed. You know we love you." Love. The word echoed hollowly in my chest, like it couldn't find anything real to land on. "You could have talked to us," my dad insisted, voice cracking. "I tried," I said. You just never listened. The line went quiet, filled only with their shallow breathing, like the control they thought they owned had slipped through their fingers in real time. And as the silence stretched between us, I realized they weren't panicking because they missed me. They were panicking because they lost their leverage. And as the call finally ended, I sat there staring at the dim light spilling through the window, knowing this wasn't the end of their desperation. It was only the beginning of how far they were willing to go. I'm a 22-year-old guy who watched their desperation grow sharper and more unrecognizable with every passing day, like fear peeling away the masks they'd worn my entire life. The calls didn't stop. They just changed tone. One minute it was anger, the next it was syrupy concern, and then suddenly, public shame. I started receiving messages from relatives I barely spoke to, asking why I'd abandoned my parents after everything they'd done for me. They're crying non-stop, my aunt texted. Your mother looks broken. Broken. The word almost made me laugh. Later that night, my dad called again, his voice noticeably softer, stripped of its usual authority. Son, come talk to us. We can fix this. We made a mistake. A mistake. Like my freedom had been an accounting error. You didn't make a mistake, I replied quietly. You made a choice. There was a tremor in his silence, the kind that comes when control finally collapses. My sister chimed in behind him, her tone sharp and panicked. You don't get to punish us just because you're upset. You're acting like you're better than us now. No, I said. I'm just finally choosing myself. The next morning, I got another call, this time from my mother, her voice weak and shaky. Your room is still here, your things, maybe you just need some time. We'll do better, I swear. But between her pauses, I could hear the same calculation they'd always used, the same balance sheet love that only existed when they needed something back. I scrolled through social media and saw a post my sister had shared, smiling on a beach, champagne glass raised, captioned family always has your back. The irony burned behind my eyes like salt in an open wound. They weren't sorry for hurting me. They were sorry they lost access to my obedience. That night, I stared at my bare apartment walls and wondered how long their regret would last before it twisted back into resentment. I could already feel the shift beginning, the quiet transformation from guilt into anger, from pleading into blame. And deep down, a terrifying question started to whisper against my peace. What would they do when they realized guilt wasn't enough to pull me back anymore? I'm a 22-year-old guy who finally realized their desperation was no longer about reconciliation, it was about salvaging their pride before the story slipped fully out of their hands. They didn't just want me back, they wanted control restored, the narrative corrected, their version of the truth polished and defensible. So when I agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, their shock was almost visible through the silence of my message. When they arrived, my mother looked smaller somehow, her eyes red, hands trembling as she clutched her purse like a shield. My father avoided my gaze, staring at the floor as if it held answers more convenient than my face. My sister sat stiffly, jaw tight, eyes sharp with restrained irritation. Thank you for coming, my mom whispered. We just want to understand why you'd hurt us like this. Hurt them. The familiar reversal made something inside me go very, very still. You sold my car without consent, I said calmly. You laughed about selling more of my things. You treated me like property. My dad finally looked up. We were under pressure. Things got out of hand. And that made stealing from me okay? I asked. My sister scoffed. You always twist things. We were trying to support real ambition. You're just bitter because yours isn't flashy. I inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every unspoken truth settle in my chest. No, I said quietly. I'm bitter because I realized I was never your son, just your fallback plan. The table fell silent. My mom's lips parted, eyes wide, like she was seeing me for the first time as a human being instead of an expectation. My dad tried to speak, but no words came out. You don't get to rewrite my pain as rebellion, I continued. You don't get to call me selfish for protecting myself from people who exploited my loyalty. The cafe hummed softly around us, cups clinking, strangers talking, life moving on as if this moment wasn't reshaping everything I thought family meant. I leaned back in my chair, surprisingly calm, surprisingly steady. This conversation isn't about forgiveness, I said. It's about clarity. And as my sister's expression hardened and my parents exchanged panicked glances, I saw it, the exact moment realization turned into silent resentment. The exact moment their shame slowly began mutating into something darker, and far less apologetic. I'm a 22-year-old guy who walked out of that cafe with a strange stillness inside me, like the storm had finally burned itself out and left only clear air in its wake. The sky outside was pale and quiet, the kind of calm that feels unreal after months of emotional chaos. I stood there for a moment, hands tucked into my jacket pockets, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of leaves, realizing I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt distance. And for the first time, distance felt like freedom instead of abandonment. My phone buzzed once more, my mother's name glowing on the screen. I didn't answer. I watched it fade, the vibration trailing off like the echo of a life I'd already stepped away from. I imagined my father pacing, my sister complaining, the house filled with confusion and frustration, and oddly, I didn't feel responsible for it anymore. Their chaos was no longer my emergency. Back in my apartment, I sank onto the worn couch, the scent of cheap cleaner mixing with the faint aroma of instant coffee. The walls were bare, the silence unfamiliar, but it felt honest. This space wasn't built on expectation or obligation. It was mine. I whispered the words out loud, tasting them slowly. This is mine. And for once, no one laughed. A message popped up from my sister a few hours later. You think you're so strong now, don't you? Let's see how long that lasts. I stared at it, then gently locked my phone, placing it face down as my heartbeat remained steady. I realized then that the real shock wasn't my leaving. It was my peace. They had always expected tears, guilt, crawling apologies. They never prepared for silence, for boundaries, for a son who chose distance over destruction. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply walking forward without their permission and never needing their approval again. As the evening light filtered through the window, painting soft gold across the floor, I felt something unfamiliar settle gently into my chest.